Story 1, The Uninvited, by Mar Gen Z. So, there I was, packed up with my buddies and heading deep into this gnarly forest, like a good 20 miles away from any sign of civilization. This wasn't your regular camping ground. This was rugged, untouched territory. We had our heavy backpacks loaded with all the essentials: tent, sleeping bags, food, water, and of course, a couple six-packs of our favorite brews. We spent the entire day trekking, laughing, joking, and taking in the wild beauty around us. As the sun started dipping low, we picked out a good spot to set up camp. We were just a bunch of guys hanging out in the wilderness, right? Just an ordinary camping trip. So we thought. As night fell, we cracked open those beers and sat around the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Man, the firelight dancing off the trees, the stars overhead, it was beautiful. But little did I know how the peaceful night was about to turn real freaky. Just before calling it a night, I figured I'd answer the call of nature one last time. I walked a good 50 feet away from camp. The forest was so quiet, just the sound of leaves crunching under my boots and my own breathing. Suddenly, I saw something that gave me the chills. I caught sight of this pair of red, glowing eyes staring right at me from the darkness. Now, I've seen my fair share of wildlife, but these eyes were different. They were big, and this deep, eerie red that I'd never seen in an animal. At first, I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just a deer or something, or maybe even another camper messing with me. But then, the creepiest thing happened. The eyes began to rise, like whatever it was standing on its hind legs. They rose higher and higher until they were at least 8 feet off the ground. I was rooted to the spot, man. Just froze up in fear. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what kind of creature this could be. Just as suddenly as they appeared, the eyes blinked out, plunging me back into total darkness. Scared out of my mind, I sprinted back to camp. I blurted out what I saw to the guys, but they thought it was just the beers talking, or maybe I was trying to scare them. We all decided to turn in, but I was wide awake the entire night, every little sound outside making me jump. When dawn broke, I was the first one out of my sleeping bag. I went over to where I saw the eyes. My heart pounded in my chest as I found massive footprints, larger than any human or animal could make. It was then I realized that whatever I saw wasn't a prank or my imagination. It was real, and it was out there with us. We packed up faster than we'd ever done before and got the hell out of there. But that experience, those eerie red eyes and the colossal footprints, they haunt me, man. I can't help but wonder, what the hell was that thing with the glowing red eyes? Was it watching us the whole night? Was it curious or hungry? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. Let's just say that camping trips are off the table for me now. I can't shake off the feeling that somewhere out there in the deep forest, those red eyes are still watching, waiting. Story 2, The Unwanted Campmate. Alright, so get this. It's last summer, and I'm totally pumped for this solo camping trip. I've always been a bit of a lone wolf, so the idea of just me, nature, and the open sky sounded like a perfect vacation. I decided to head out to this well-known national park that was famous for its beauty, and off I went with my gear in tow. I arrived, found the perfect spot to set up camp with an epic view of the mountain range. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, cooked myself a nice little dinner on the camping stove. So far, so good, right? Everything was just as peaceful as I had imagined. After a long day of hiking and exploring, I decided to call it a night. I zipped myself into my cozy sleeping bag, listening to the sweet sounds of crickets and the occasional owl hoot. But that peace, well, it was about to be totally shattered. In the dead of night, I was jolted awake by this soft, whispering voice. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't some animal. This was a human voice, saying my name over and over again. But it was all wrong, like it was being stretched out and distorted. So there I was, laying in my tent, in the pitch black forest, with this voice circling around me. And the creepiest part, it sounded like it was coming from right outside my tent. Now, I've got a common name, so for a hot second I thought, okay, maybe it's just some other camper nearby talking to their buddy with the same name. But that hope went right out the window when the voice said, "I see you sleeping there." Freaked out, I did the only thing I could think of. I slowly unzipped my tent, trying to keep as quiet as possible. I poked my head out, and there he was, a man standing at the edge of my campsite. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there in the dark, staring at me. Our eyes locked, and this shiver ran down my spine. It felt like he could see right into my soul. Then, without a word, he turned around and vanished into the forest, like he was never even there. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, just stayed there in my tent, staring at the spot where the man had stood. When the first light of dawn finally cut through the darkness, I felt like I could breathe again. I unzipped my tent fully this time, hoping that what had happened last night was just a nightmare. But there, right next to my tent, was a note. A single line written in this scraggly handwriting. "Nice meeting you. See you again soon." Let's just say, I didn't stick around to find out what that meant. I packed up faster than I ever thought possible and booked it out of there. To this day, I can't shake off that night. The man's eyes, his voice, that note, it's all seared into my mind. I still go camping, but never alone. And every time I zip up my tent for the night, I can't help but remember that unwanted campmate. Story 3. The Vanishing Friend. Now, this story, man, this one still gets me. So, back when I was a teenager, my best friend, let's call him Jake, and I were two peas in a pod. We were always out and about, exploring our small town, getting up to mischief, the whole deal. But what we loved the most was camping. There was nothing like escaping from our everyday lives and losing ourselves in the wilderness. One summer, we decided to go camping at our favorite spot near this small creek. It was kind of our secret spot, you know? Just two teenagers and the great outdoors. We had it all planned out, a weekend of fishing, swimming, and stargazing. We packed our bags and off we went, the excitement bubbling in our chests. The day went by as expected, setting up the camp, fishing in the creek, cooking our catch on the fire, and having a good laugh. As night fell, we sat around the fire, watching the flames dance and the stars twinkle overhead. Then, the fire started to die down, and Jake decided to get more firewood. He grabbed his flashlight and headed off into the forest, the light bouncing around as he disappeared into the trees. I stayed back at the camp, poking at the dying fire and waiting for him to return. Minutes turned into an hour, and I started to feel uneasy. Jake was a prankster, always pulling one joke or another, but this wasn't like him. I called out his name, my voice echoing through the stillness, but there was no response. Only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Fear began to crawl up my spine, and I grabbed my own flashlight to go find him. The forest that seemed so familiar during the day suddenly felt alien and threatening. I trudged through the undergrowth, calling Jake's name over and over. after what felt like an eternity, I found his flashlight on the ground, but there was no sign of Jake. My mind was racing, panic setting in. Had he fallen and hurt himself? Was he lost? I ran back to our camp and did the only thing I could think of. I called the authorities. I told them what happened, and soon the forest was swarming with search and rescue teams. They searched the entire forest, combed every inch of it, but they never found Jake. He had just vanished. That was 20 years ago, and the mystery of what happened to Jake still haunts me. They never found a trace of him, and the case went cold. I tried to move on, but every time I pass a forest, I can't help but think of Jake in that fateful night. I often wonder what happened to him in that forest. Did he get lost? Did he run away? Or did something take him? I'll probably never know, and maybe it's for the best. I'll always remember Jake and our camping trips, but I've never set foot in a forest since then. The mere thought sends shivers down my spine. After all, who knows what lurks in the wilderness waiting for the next unsuspecting camper?